Alrighty, so we are on. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Feel the Heal with Daisy. On this week's episode, I'm so excited. I have Phil here with me, and he is the owner, basically creator, behind Modern Kings. He is basically a coach for men, a mentor for men. Modern Masculinity Mentor is what he is. And I'm just so excited. I have my own reasons for why he aligns with just the message at Feel the Heal, but also just part of the mission that I have as far as um, expanding our conscious awareness with each other, both in the feminine and the masculine. But I want to invite him on and give him a minute to just kind of introduce himself and give us a little bit more backstory to the modern masculinity mentor and how you really created that and came up with that. So, welcome and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Daisy. It's great to be here. And yeah, I suppose the backstory for that is, and a lot of the time we start our own businesses or our purpose is birthed out of what we wish we had when we were younger. And that's kind of where this lies for me. So I'm 33 now. And when I was growing up, like I was raised by a single mother and my dad wasn't around so much. And, I had a stepfather who was in the house, but there was like a bit of a gap. In terms of the fatherhood and I guess I had to learn a lot of things myself as a boy and a man growing up. I definitely had mentors, like my grandfather was around and yeah, my stepfather, but I learned a lot by myself. And when you're learning by yourself, things can take a lot longer, and I think you learn lessons a lot harder as well sometimes when you're learning by yourself. And I had to try things that worked and didn't work, and I guess over time, I just realized I got to a stage now where I'm 33, and in the last few years, where I find myself talking to younger men, and they ask me questions, and I feel like I have a lot of the answers, and it just made me realize that it gives me a lot of joy as well to be able to give some of these answers that I wish I had when I was younger. So that's what birthed Modern Kings and the work that I'm doing at the moment, especially when it comes to conscious dating, because
Mm.
yeah, when I was younger I didn't know how to speak to women. I found myself a lot of time in the friend zone. I didn't know how to be intimate. This was like from the teens to early 20s, and I made a lot of mistakes. I figured a lot of things out, and now I'm at a point where I don't know it all, but I definitely know enough where I can empower younger men or any single man with the tools that I've learned along the way.
Wow, that's powerful. I'm so glad there's like more spaces opening up that offer that to men. Because just like I was saying before, I think, well, you see it in our culture. There's like the divorce rates are so like, I think they're like increasing, but I think it's like 50% of married couples end up divorcing. And I think a lot of it comes down to like our societal conditioning of how we're supposed to show up in a relationship, that we never really learn what is our conscious way of participating with another person in an intimate way. And how is it authentic to me? What does that look like for me? And so when you say you wish you felt like you were missing like guidance growing up, you felt like you were missing um like understanding of how to be a conscious man or how to participate in relationships. It's so interesting to me because I feel like even people that have that in their life, they're realizing they're having to actually unlearn what they were programmed to believe is how to show up for a woman. So I'd love to get more specific about like what are the things that you felt you were lacking that you have kind of discovered?
Mm, well, I think the biggest piece in connection with anyone, but also the male and female dynamic, is communication and understanding how to communicate effectively. And one of the biggest tools that I learned in that is, have you heard of nonviolent communication?
No.
So NVC for short. It's a concept developed by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg from I think the 60s or 70s, and he wrote a book about it. And when I came across that, it was so powerful. It's about communicating from a needs basis and what you're feeling at the time. So instead of blaming somebody, so this typically is in a relationship dynamic. So if you're, for example, you want the dishes cleaned, you could yell at your partner and say, "You didn't do the dishes, like you're the worst, you're always making a mess." Or you could say, "I have a need for the house to be clean, and it makes me feel a lot of discomfort and disease, and I feel unloved when they're not being done." And it's not manipulative because it's a discussion. It's based around needs, and if you express your needs from an I standpoint instead of blaming like you are this and you are that, then that level of communication is so powerful for building connection, for dealing with any kind of issue that can arise. And that for me was one of the biggest tools that I've learned that I still want to delve deeper into MVC, but it's just very powerful, and I highly recommend any of your listeners to look into that. There's actually a video on YouTube which it goes for 3 hours, and it's Dr. Marshall Rosenberg explaining the concept of it in a really easy to understand fashion. So if you have 3 hours, watch that video. If not, definitely get the book.
Great. So that's interesting to think about as far as communicating your needs. So, do you think that you had a harder time communicating your needs or receiving the other person in their communication of their needs? Because I mean that sounds good and dandy, like that sounds like a great concept, and I'm sure when you study it in depth it's great to apply. But what if people aren't receptive to your needs? How do you help support people in relationships where their needs aren't being met and they've tried communicating effectively?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think just to backtrack as well, where I was unable to express my needs was probably because through childhood, had a bit of a tumultuous home where there was a lot of fighting, and I was never so much involved in the fighting. I was more on the outside, and it felt like I didn't want to communicate my needs so much because there was so much going on. So I kind of just
Mm,
quiet and kept a low profile. So learning later in life, that unlearning that you were talking about, or relearning how to communicate my needs was something that I wanted to work on. And I think I just want to mention as well, I'm not a nonviolent communication practitioner. So when it comes to what it would look like if somebody's needs aren't being met and how to flip that around, I suppose, hmm, it's about a heart-centered approach, right? It's about coming from the heart and being uh, intentional about it. Because if if you're coming from a place of love and you're saying your needs, that's something that's true for you, then ideally your partner would want to honor that. And what I've discovered in my relationships as well is that if I'm coming truly from my heart and I have a request and a need and that's not going to be honored, then I don't really feel like it's the right relationship.
mm.
And then that other person really needs to look at themselves and how they show up in a relationship. And there's so many different ways that we can grow and become more heart centered. And I mean, you know as well as I do, there's so many modalities of like ways to get there. And that would be my thought is, for me, you can try to work on the relationship and work and work. And I have in the past. I've been in a relationship where I had lots of issues and I was trying to work through it and talk about my needs and be connected with the person. But at the end of the day, after all the work that was done, all said and done, it wasn't the right relationship. So that to me is sometimes the answer. I don't think it's always give up straight away if things aren't working, but definitely it's a potential option.
Wow, that's really powerful because I mean, really, that question that I asked you is pretty loaded too, if you think about it, because there's so many dynamics to consider. It's like okay, if I've communicated from a centered place, my needs aren't getting met. Um, my partner's not, or my friend or whoever it may be, really can be general relationships, aren't willing to show up from a heart centered place to try to match my needs,
Mm,
but yet I'm still participating in the relationship. So, do you do work with your clients around how can I help you make empowered choices that are
mm,
more aligned, or do you help them dive into maybe the wounds that they have that are prohibiting them from realizing or just taking ownership of like my needs aren't unrealistic, my needs are authentic to me, they're honest needs, and I'm worthy of those needs being met. So have you come across people that um that struggle with that struggle with being taking ownership of their needs and getting to the place of worthiness of those needs being met?
mm. So that's a big one, worthiness, and that comes down to self-love. And I was talking about this the other day, that if you don't love yourself, then you're also not going to value your own needs. And if you don't value your own needs, then why would your partner value your needs? You know, uh, they might, but it's possible that if they're not, that's why. So starting with self love and self compassion is really the key to all of this. And I realized that in one of my past relationships that I I was copying some abuse, some verbal abuse, and it wasn't physical, but I I stayed in that relationship, and a big part of that was because I suppose I didn't have enough self-worth to realize that I didn't deserve any of that, and to get out when it made sense to get out. And I stayed in that relationship for a lot longer than I should have. So one of the things that definitely helps for this is a lot of internal reflection. So as a coach, I would never tell someone what to do. Uh, I I don't know exactly everything that's going on in the mind and where that's coming from. I can ask questions and get to certain points, but at the end of the day, I really believe that we have the answers within ourselves. And one of the biggest tools, or two of the biggest tools for that, that's helped me personally, but also helps my clients, is meditation and journaling. And those two together combined are incredibly powerful. Uh, to start off with a meditation and set the intention as well. So if you have a specific situation that you're dealing with, then to meditate on that for 20 minutes, half an hour, 10 minutes, whatever makes sense for you, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then following that, just get a notebook out and a pen and do what my mentor calls God consciousness. So like stream of consciousness, but God consciousness. It's coming from God onto the paper, and God, whatever that means for you, doesn't have to be the typical meaning of the word. And just write what comes to your mind with that same intention. And a lot of the time, what I've found is that you get the answer that you need, and it comes out so naturally. And what I find particularly with men that I speak to is like, journaling is not for me. Like, why would I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And journaling wasn't a thing that I did. When was it? 7 years ago. Before that, I'd never even thought about it. And then somebody recommended it to me. I read a blog about the value of journaling and how to do it, and it's actually really simple. Like you don't have to overthink it. Just get a book and a pen and just write. And the best way, I'm trying to give tools to the audience here as well, and practical, I like ways to do things. So the
Love
best
it.
way to do that is to just imagine that you're writing it to yourself, for yourself, and no one else in the world is going to see it. Because sometimes we write like, oh, what if someone reads it or whatever? But
Mm.
imagine that no one's ever going to read it. Maybe you'll never read it again. And just try it one time. Invite people to try that and see how it works. And it's amazing the thoughts that come out, and it's thoughts that are in our subconscious already. But when they come out on paper, it just becomes so much clearer. It's like, oh, this is the thing that I need to do to take me to that next step, to make that change in my life, to have that conversation with the person, whatever it may be. So, yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion. So, Your method is more like meditate, get still, kind of like that the Bible saying, be still and know. Like when you get really still, when you really honor just everything that's coming up and you hold space for it, that inner knowing starts to voice starts to be heard. And then you recommend just like letting that stream through onto paper. Do you ever use like journal prompts, or do you find yourself revisiting questions a lot that you like to journal on in relation to being, a conscious masculine man?
No, interesting question. I know that the rabbit hole of journaling goes deep, and there's lots of books on it. I read the what's the one, the Miracle Morning, that talks about journaling. There's the 5 a.m. Club, talks about specific ways to journal. But to be honest, the way that I journal, it's how I'm feeling at the moment. I set an intention, like this is the problem that I have, and I'm trying to seek X solution. Or maybe I don't even know what the solution is. That's what the journaling is for. So um, I don't really have prompts, is the answer to that. I'll just start writing and I know what my intention is, and then I'll figure it out along the way. And I think that's a really beautiful way to do it because there's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's just simple. Just get the book out. Like I have my book here somewhere. Um, Oh, well, here's one of them. I've got lots of books. Here's another one. I always have it by my side and just ready to go whenever something comes up.
So you're pretty introspective, and you're attuned to your feelings.
Hmm.
So I'm assuming that's something that maybe men that are coming to you for the first time aren't really there yet. Like some people, if you say, "Hey, how are you feeling?" Like some people genuinely don't know, or they don't know how to express what they're feeling. So how do you help people develop a practice of that, or get to more of an introspective place, especially men? Because I think if we really take into consideration, like you mentioned, some men are grow up without a strong male influence that makes them understand how to be introspective or more attuned. But really, outside of that, I feel like culturally we have a lot of men that come up that just in general, they're not taught how to feel their feelings, how to validate their feelings, um, how to honor them, and how to express them, not just to partners or loved ones, but also just to other men, like, to share and hold space for that with each other. Because I know, even women, like just in our culture in general, we don't know how to like regulate our emotional experiences very well. It's just
Mm.
not something we're taught. And now that we have more language around trauma and regulation and stuff like that, we're learning how to do it. But I think even more so for men, they always say, "Oh, women when they get together, they talk about all their feelings," and like it seems like women are more connected to that aspect of self, where men kind of historically have been taught to do the opposite.
Hmm.
So how do you work with that?
Yeah, for sure. It's like I suppose the war generation taught the younger men to be more stoic, and then like our parents, typically fathers and men, tend to close off from emotions, and then we're like my generation and younger. Uh, I guess the renaissance of trying to feel again, but also learning how to do that. And for me, another really important tool is emotional release. So, are you familiar
Mm,
with emotional release as a tool?
no,
So,
surprisingly. I mean, I need it with all
so
the stuff. I mean, I probably do emotional release techniques without calling it emotional
yeah,
release.
yeah. Well, that one for me, like as when I was growing up, I saw anger in the home, and I saw anger as a negative emotion, and I was like, I can't express anger because when people get angry, it's scary, and it's off-putting, and there's so many negative reasons why not to be angry. But anger is a valid emotion, and so is sadness, and so is happiness, and all the emotions, they're human emotions that need to be felt when they're running through the body. So what I discovered is it's important to release that. Otherwise, it gets stuck in the body, and that's when like aggression comes out in unhealthy ways, and illnesses can come out, and like mental and also physical illnesses. So instead of letting it get stuck in the body, to release that. And that could look like a scream, simple scream, just like, ah, as loud as you can. It could be like hitting a pillow. It could be, I don't know, it could be lifting weights, going for a jog and like just yelling the whole way, but really just like letting that all out. And for me, like I even did that this morning. I had something that was flowing through my body that I needed to let out, and I just screamed. And yeah, I felt much better afterwards. And have you read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, the book?
Mm-mm.
There's a quote in that that I love, from Socrates, and he says, "Let it flow and then let it go." So if we don't let it flow, it's going to hold on to us. But if we do let it flow and push that out with the emotional release, then we can let it go. And that's also a really powerful aspect of a modern masculine man as well, is not holding on to things that don't serve us, whether that's resentment or anger or all those things, frustration, to work through it. And yeah, one of those tools is emotional release, which is really powerful.
So I'm just curious on your perspective on this. So thinking, because you work with men, like you're a mentor, like directed towards men.
Hmm.
And so I'm wondering if you have any perspective on like the difference between masculine and feminine energy and how it's experienced, channeled, expressed. Like, do
Mm,
you find that, maybe a man's need for emotional release and how that is achieved can differ or vary from the way that a woman would need that experience?
mm. It's an interesting question. So I've been in a few emotional release workshops where I've been around uh, both masculine and feminine energies, and I don't know about the nuances of it, but what I do know is that it works powerfully for both. Uh,
Mm.
yeah. So and from my own personal experience as well, having not done it before, and then the first time I did it, it was like crazy. And like I've done a lot of talk therapy in my life, and this, like, just screaming and hitting the pillow and like letting that out, that was so much therapy. And I'm a talker, I like to converse and communicate, and I feel like I want to be heard and understood. And it's so nice to get out of that headiness, the cerebral madness, and just like be in your body screaming, like letting all that energy out. And I know I'm diverting from your question about the nuances, the differences between how men and women, masculine and feminine, would respond to emotional release. I don't think I have a clear answer for that, other than I've seen it work very well for both.
Yeah, no, I love where you went with that because I, it just makes me think because, I do somatic work. I teach I facilitate somatic therapy and treatment centers. So I do a lot of work with the body and we do emotional release. I teach a lot of like shaking and dancing and, the humming or chanting, things like
Mm-hmm.
that can really help to release that energy. Um, but it just makes me think about like it's funny how we have these terms, like I was just talking to someone about it recently, how like we've developed all these terms as a society to try to support the experiences that are necessary versus like thousands of years ago our ancestors, like they didn't have probably a word for emotional release,
Mm-hmm.
like they probably just screamed and like
Totally.
stomped on the ground when they needed to. But
Yeah.
now we have like, and I'm a junkie like for psychotherapy and like the language of trauma and all that stuff, but I find it almost like comical at the same time because
Mm,
I'm just like, really, all this language is doing is it's like circling us back to our instinctual nature.
mm,
And just the whole time you were talking about like the emotions, like the emotional release and expressing it, and the whole concept of let it flow. It's like really all you're doing is like you're feeling your feelings, like you're feeling
mm,
them, you're honoring them, and you're supporting them with your physical being. And um, I have a 2.5-year-old son, and it's just so funny because he's learning right now. He knows how to say happy, he knows how to say sad, and he knows how to say anger. And it's so funny because sometimes he'll be like really crying and like kind of throwing a tantrum, and I'll go, "Oh, buddy, bud, are you sad? Are you sad?" And so, and he knows. Sometimes he'll say, "Yeah, I'm sad," and sometimes he says, "No, anger." And
Hmm.
he's like crying and like just frustrated. And as a mother, I'm just like, wow, like I just have to show him how to ride this feeling out. Like I just have to show him how to be like, I'm angry, I'm pissed, you know? And it's
Mm,
just such a teacher for me because it's like I feel kind of blessed that I can just sit with him and help, regulate him through that, and
mm,
not not try to change him, not try to distract him, not try to make him feel better, but
yeah.
just to hold him and witness him as he now. And it's funny when I lean into it, I notice that like it's like that. Like all of a sudden he's like redirected and ready to just do the next thing. And that's the stuff I feel like we're not taught. We're not, like you said, like you, for someone who witnesses the stress and the negative consequence of anger, you learned like, I'm not allowed to be angry, or I'm not allowed to have certain feelings, so you deny them. Is it hard for you to uncover what blocks individuals have, like if it's around certain things, or have you noticed that most men struggle with a healthy expression of like those main emotions of like anger, sadness, fear?
It's funny because I'm finding more and more men are able to tap into that once we actually start discussing it. But maybe that's the generation that I'm working with. It's usually sub 30. Older men tend to really struggle with that stuff. So I think a lot of it comes down to like the self love conversation that we were talking about. And when you can start loving yourself, then you can, like, everything else flows from that, and emotions can flow a little bit more naturally as well. And I think it's just leaning into it. So when you're aware of this, the nervous system starting to react in whatever way it is. So, like, I'll tell you a story. This morning I was feeling my nervous system, something was happening, and I just needed to, I decided to meditate. And there's so many ways, there's so many tools, and the one I decided to use was meditation. And I did the box breathing. So 5 seconds in, 5 second hold, 5 second out. It's what the Navy SEALs use. It's like, it's great for like lowering the nervous system. And as I was doing it, I wasn't feeling it lower. I was feeling that still was bubbling and bubbling. And that's when, it's a toolbox. So you can grab different tools at different times. And I was like, now is the time, because it's bubbling, it's still there. I'm just going to scream. And I used to think that screaming, it makes me look crazy. I like, what am I doing? How can I be like that? And I've shifted that. And I think that in answer to your question, I think that part of the reason why a lot of people don't want to do these kinds of things is because it makes us look a little bit crazy. Like emotional release, like just yelling, just like, ah. And maybe it does, but also it's very valuable and it helps us through that. So I did that this morning, and I like, ah, I screamed out loud like 3 or 4 times, and that it it released it. It flowed out of my body, and I started to feel more calm. And I also just want to make it clear as well, like it's not a silver bullet, If, let's say, you crashed your car and you've got to deal with the insurance and the repair and everything, and your body's all like amped up, and then you scream and let it all out, it's not going to make the problem go away. It's just going to change your mindset and release that energy and give you the opportunity to actually think clearly to solve the problem, rather than maybe you've crashed your car and someone else was to blame, and you don't let out that scream in the car in that moment, and then you turn around and the person comes up and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, like I didn't see you coming. And then you're like, you fucking idiot, then you release it on them. And that's when problems happen with communication, with fighting, with wars, like if we want to go that far. So that's why I believe it's such a powerful tool.
Wow, yeah, that's great. It's a great practice to have, like you said, like practice getting comfortable expressing and releasing that and sitting with self, like you said, doing meditation, journaling, so that you can practice tuning in. And then that way, when you're out there in life, you can have that resource, and your body's like, wait, I know what to do here. I know what to do when I'm bubbling up. I can let out this scream and then reintegrate. But
Mm,
when you were talking about self-love, I was just thinking, we talked about a a release or a way of processing and attuning to anger, or like what we need to release in that way. Do you have any tools for men that you use for practicing self-love? Like, what do you suggest for men to, because even again, like I'm sure you work, like you said, with like some of the younger guys below 30 who are a way more open, maybe, let's say, to this. But for other people, people don't know what self-love is. A
mm,
lot of people think they have self-love and they don't. So how do you start that practice with people?
mm. Yeah, thanks for asking that because it's a big one. And there's a spectrum of self love, from right down here, which is like, I fucking hate myself. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
I fucking hate
Yes.
myself. um this is the worst, I don't want to live. Like that's like the darkest. And then you've got way up the top, which is like maybe enlightenment, where you're just so in love with yourself and everything's so brilliant. And in between that is all layers of people. And I come across clients, and I'm sure you come across people in your day to day, which are like anywhere in there. And there are a number of tools that can help those people, but it's also about working out where on that spectrum they lie and how much like work they need and what they need to do to help move further down the needle of that spectrum. And for me, one of those practices, it's a big one that comes up a lot in these like spiritual circles and in personal development, is gratitude. So
Mm.
it's really hard to hate yourself if you think of the things that you're grateful for, if you focus on that. So no matter where you are in life, there's always at least one thing you can find to be grateful for. If your life is going great, then you can also have lots of things to be grateful for. But even in the darkest of places, we can always find at least one thing or a few things to be grateful for. And that's a really good place to start. It's not going to solve all the problems, but doing it, like having a gratitude practice, and for a lot of men, this can sound a little bit too airy fairy, but just being grateful. So like I woke up this morning, that could be one thing. Like I'm alive. Like how good is that? I I was on Mount Shasta in California a couple months ago, and the top of this mountain, and I slept in the car. I was doing a bit of a road trip, and there were a bunch of like mountain hippies up there who were awesome. Drum circle, and there was a full moon, and there was a fire, and it was so cool. And then it was like 5:30 in the morning or something, and I woke up and went to the fireplace. It was still like embering, and there was a few people just chilling and playing the drums, and very hippie vibe, as you can probably imagine. And this guy wakes up and he's like fully wrapped up, and uh, I'm making a judgment call, but it doesn't look like he has a lot to his name. Like he looks like he's kind of just traveling in his car, and he's got it like living very simply. And
He's a nomad,
yeah, he was nomad. He seemed kind of like a bit rough, like he was living rough.
a
I would
drifter.
assume, yeah, a bit like that. And and then he woke up and he like rolled over and he did this big stretch and he yells out, "I'm so grateful to be alive!" And it was the first thing that came out of his mouth, and I had this huge smile. I was like, "Wow." Like this guy's doing it right. Like to wake up and for that to be the first thing you think and say, like, how many times have we woken up? Like, I know I have. I can't speak for you, but I've woken up and been like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed, or I have to do all this stuff, and, life sucks, or whatever it is. But to wake up like that, and I don't know if he does it every morning. I only met him one time. I was just so energized by that thought or that that behavior. It was so wonderful.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, to be that programmed into gratitude, like that attuned to your gratitude, that it's the first thing your subconscious mind cues in the morning.
Hmm.
So that's basically, like, that's essentially the purpose of that practice, is to start to kind of like create that like programming of like, if you have this love for life and you recognize the gifts within it and the blessings within it, you start to open yourself up to love and to extending that gratitude, not just of life and what's in it, but towards yourself, is what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And then like the many reasons that you may not love yourself, you can start working on those as well. Like, for example, if you think that I've been eating too much, I feel overweight, I hate myself, then you can start focusing on that and start eating healthier and keeping fit. Or if it's you feel like you're not confident, you feel like you can't talk to women and you're worthless because you can't get a date, then you can start working on that as well and find books and speak to people and work out ways to work through that. And like I said, none of this stuff is a silver bullet. They're just tools that help to elevate you to that next step, to create the life that you want, to be the best version of yourself, to have self-love and to move that needle up the spectrum.
So when you have clients come to you, what are the main, like the top wounds, or like, let's say, quote, we'll put in parentheses, problems that people think they have when they come to you? And is it, well, I'll let you answer that first.
Mhm. So the top three that I get a lot is number one is confidence, so lacking confidence. Number two is communication, so how to actually talk to women and what to talk about. And number
Mm.
three is the fear of rejection. So that's and no, I wouldn't say in any particular order. Like fear of rejection is probably number one, but they're all they're all kind of connected.
Wow. I mean, yeah, we talked about it briefly before we started recording, but just like how men have a little bit more pressure on them to kind of like be the initiator, just
Hmm.
on a cultural like level, and how we're conditioned of the role of male versus female. And I mean, I have to be honest, like I've even thought to myself before, like, I'm so glad I never have to worry about like hitting on a man, or like if it's meant to be, like he'll hit on me first or something like that. Like, and it's just so true because women don't have as much pressure on themselves of like calling love into their life in that way, where men have more of a pressure of like, if I want to call love into my life, like I'm expected almost to be the initiator. And so
Hmm.
if you couple that with that fear of rejection, that's a heavy weight to
Hmm.
carry. So I'm sure that, and then like you said, it's all interconnected, because it's like, where do I get the confidence to show
Mm.
up? And when I'm confident in who I am authentically, then maybe I'm confident in how I communicate and being authentically relating to somebody. So what do you start to kind of move towards first of those
Mm.
three?
Well, I know I keep pushing it, but it's about self-love. So if you don't love yourself, you feel worthless, then you're gonna maybe ask a girl out to go on a date. You'll put yourself out there. Let's say hypothetically, if you decided to go up and get that confidence and ask her, and then she says no for whatever reason, then you're validating the fact that you think you're worthless because she doesn't.
Mm,
And because you have no self-love or little self-love, you're like, oh, okay, cool. That's true about me. I am worthless. She doesn't want to go out with me. And when that happens, you've got a piece of data that's telling you all this, and you don't want to try again. Or, yeah, essentially, you don't want to try again. So you feel like you already know the answer. You tell yourself the story that if the next girl who I'm interested in, who I think we have a connection, I'm not going to ask her because I know how this goes. And I know this from experience. So when I was grade four, I was interested in a girl called Rachel who was in my school. How old was I? I was like 6 or 7. So um, very experienced back then. And this was the first girl I ever had like for what I felt was like a romantic interest in. And I remember on the playground, I went up to her and I said, "Do you want to be my girlfriend?" And she laughed. And she said, "No, why would I?" Like, I can't remember exactly, but she was like, "Why would I want to be your girlfriend?" And that
Mm.
really hurt. And it took me, so that was grade four. It took me 2 years to pluck up the courage again when there was another girl I liked called Gabby.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, I can do it now. Like, it's been 2 years. I'm a man now. I'm eight. So I'm gonna ask her out, and I think I did it the really romantic way over MSN. So I sent her a message on MSN Messenger, and I said similar thing. Will you be my girlfriend? And she said the same thing. Like, no, I'm not interested. And those two data points at that time in my life made me realize, like, I don't want to put myself out there again. I've been rejected twice. It feels horrible. And I didn't ask a girl out again for like till I was 20. Like,
Oh.
yeah. And my first girlfriend was at 20. And those two experiences definitely had a lot to do with that. I wouldn't say all of it, but yeah, it was really tough. And I always used to say, like, I don't want a girlfriend in high school, but this was after those two rejections. Like, why would you want a girlfriend in high school? Because like you're just going to end up breaking up and you're not going to marry them anyway. But I think that was coming from a place of pain that I had been
Mm.
from these two girls that,
Yeah.
imagine if Rachel said yes, like where I would be, I'd be some Casanova, I'd be the guy at school with a girlfriend. But yeah, I put myself out there and I failed. It wasn't failure, it was just a learning experience. And I told myself the story that I wasn't worthy of a girlfriend. And that happens time and time again. And I know going off in tangents, but it comes back to the self love. And what I needed to learn was confidence in myself and being authentic and loving who I am. And it's funny what happens when you love yourself is that you could get rejected 1,000 times and it doesn't matter anymore, because at the end of the day, you know who you are and you love yourself. And another funny aspect of that is that you actually don't get rejected as much because you're seen as authentic.
Yeah, and that's attractive by nature, just authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
When you can feel when someone's in their authentic nature, and it's way more attractive than, well, and it feels like, from my perspective, more safe. Like, you feel more safe, in someone's company when you can tell they're being genuine versus when someone's not being genuine. It cues like this, um a distrust. And I feel like when you're, you know, coming from a conscious place and you're trying to interact in conscious relationships, you know, a woman that is, might be attracted to the man that's disingenuous because of her own wounds that she hasn't addressed yet, versus the conscious man who knows who he is, who's being authentic. And so, yeah, it's important to consider that. And I'm curious too, like, just in your line of work, like, what do you in this kind of goes back to the communication thing. How do you think initiation communication impacts a person's experience in dating? Like, how they initiate communication. Do you think that plays a part? Like, and I'm also, like, as I'm saying this, I'm also thinking of social media, and I'm thinking of just, social media was not a dynamic that even came into play for the generations before us.
Mm,
And really, like, those of us who are in our 30s now, like, we were the generation that is the in between, where we lived without that and then we lived within it. So, and we were kind of that, we're kind of the guinea pigs, really, of
mm,
like how social media impacts relationship dynamics. And I'm sure there's like a whole episode we could do on like how it impacts people who are already together in a relationship, and how it can contribute to feeling unsafe and, not trusting and things like that. But how do you think that plays into Is there any of that involved in you working with men of like how to help them come into alignment of like appropriate ways to communicate to attract conscious relationships
Mm,
versus like superficial or whatever it may be?
yeah, interesting point. So I can tell you that I haven't initiated on social media, I don't think ever from memory, with somebody I don't know, I just connected with, and I'm like, hey, want to go on a date or whatever that is. I think maybe what comes out of that is because, like, let's say this woman posts, I don't know, beautiful photos on Instagram. I'm not going to be the only guy who's messaging her. There's going to be hundreds of guys. And I feel like, I don't know, it just hasn't really resonated for me to talk to a woman in that way. I know that a lot of guys do that. And I think if you are doing that, it needs to be in a way that's like hyper conscious. Because if this woman has a public profile and let's say she has thousands of followers, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's just friends of friends. She only has a few hundred followers. Either way, she's probably getting messages from people, from guys. So you definitely don't want to be sending dick pics. That's a big no-no. Um, but it's just about, I guess, communicating consciously and from a place of love and integrity. If we're talking about Instagram or social media, uh, I've realized kind of in the last probably 6 months that I really get a lot of joy from connecting in the real world. Like even
Mm.
where I deleted all my dating apps, and when I say all, like I had a bunch of them because you gotta be on all the platforms, right? If you're on the dating apps, you may as well be on all of them just to make sure that you can connect with whoever's out there. And then it ends up sucking so much time, and it's just not real. So I don't want to judge too harshly because I know a lot of people do enjoy the dating apps, and I've been on them in the past as well. But for me personally, they don't really resonate so much anymore.
Do you think that's because, like, in a way, through the apps and through a digital platform, you can just kind of desensitize yourself or mask that like fear of rejection and kind of hide behind something and not have to be fully like seen almost? Do you think
Mhm.
that like impacts that?
Yeah, that's a part of it. I think what it comes to is like on dating apps, you become a commodity, right? Like I've seen a girl's app where they can literally, let's say Tinder, which is in my opinion the worst of the apps. But if they swipe yes to a guy, they're 70% likely to get a yes. I don't know. I'm just making science up, but if they swipe yes, 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 they can have like any guy they want on there a lot of the time, or most of the guys. Whereas for a guy, like it's flipped the reverse, where like it's very rare, and every now and then you'll get a woman who's interested. So
Oh yeah.
for a guy dating, there's so much that there's not a lot of accountability, from what I've seen from, I guess, both sides. But I have so many friends who spend time talking to a woman, connecting deeply, arranging a date, but they've never had a phone call. They've only had like text messages. There's no real connection. And then the night will come around. It's like Friday night. They've like done their hair if they have any, and they've got their outfit ready. Get a text message saying, "Sorry, my dog's sick. I'm going to stay in tonight." And that may
Mm,
be true. For whatever reason, she doesn't want to go out with the guy, and maybe she decided she wasn't interested. Maybe she found someone else. There's many. Maybe her dog's really sick. Uh, but either way, it happens so much on the dating apps. And how's that energy? How's that, like that waste of energy in getting ready, getting excited all week? Maybe you were thinking about, you at work and you had a long week, and then that Friday night's the night you're going to go on this date with this beautiful woman who you feel like you've been connecting with, and then she's like, "Oh, sorry, no." And then what now? You're not, you got to figure something else out. I don't know. Maybe you're talking to somebody else and you text them and, hey, you want to come like go out tonight? And it's not really someone you liked, but you're just kind of trying to fill that void of feeling a bit worthless and rejected. Uh,
mm,
I've just seen that time and time again, not just with other people, with myself as well. And
wow.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
no, I'm glad you mentioned it because one of
no,
my girlfriends, same thing with her. And I was wondering if it was like more of a guy's behavior of that, because she's on like dating apps, and she, same thing, like she'll have like week long conversations with a guy on a dating app, and then when the time comes, he like
Mm.
flakes on her, and it does, it like perpetuates those narratives,
Yeah.
um that contradict our self-love. It
Yeah.
perpetuates those feelings. And so yeah, I mean, I'm gathering is, I think that there are that I'm curious now, we'll have to look it up, like the percentage
Mm.
of people who really get those like authentic connections through those
Mm.
apps, and conscious connections. Because I think that's the thing too with the world. It's like, how do you really know someone's genuine intentions through those
Mm.
things? Like, is it just easy? Like, are they just interested in a physical, valid, maybe at valid, like, is someone just engaging because they're trying to validate themselves through that, and not really interested in the accountability of like true
Mm.
intimacy? um it's so many great like points to navigate, but it's like valid, it's also valid because it is a reality of our world today. And it's a valid thing to like consider when it comes to navigating the dating world. And some
Mm.
people are very conscious and have been on this personal development journey, and they get called to say like, I am ready to put myself out there and go on these apps. And
Mm.
um but I want to give you the chance to like just kind of fill us in on any more information that you'd love to share about just the Modern Masculinity Mentor, like what you're doing with that, and any
Mm.
points that you feel like we've kind of left out with that are important to get across, like your energy, your vibe as a mentor.
Mm. Thank you for that. I would say that the starting point, this is the step one of my program. The starting point is becoming the best version of yourself and working on all aspects of shadow, of past traumas, of the things that are not serving you as a man. And that's where I started. My journey was about 8 years ago, where I decided actively that I needed to work on so many aspects of my life. And I started doing all the things, reading books. So as soon as I realized that there was something, I was lacking discipline, I would find a book on discipline. There's a book called Grit that I read. Actually, I wouldn't recommend. It was okay, but it was very sciencey, very like. Anyway, I digress. Health, like work out. If are you as healthy as you could be? Uh, Try to eat better. Try to go to gym, like work out multiple days a week. Go to therapy, speak to someone about the things that are going on. For me, therapy was one of the biggest tools because I hadn't ever spoken about this stuff in my life, like the traumas, the old wounds that I had hidden down and repressed. So talking is so important as much as the somatic work and the emotional release and all of that. Find friends who you can trust and connect with them about it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist to begin with. Speak to a friend who you trust and talk about what's holding you back. So a story that got me on my journey was when I was 25. I was studying digital media actually, and I had a lecturer who was a psychologist, and we were doing a class on storytelling for video games. That was one of the subjects, and I hadn't slept really that night. I'd been in this depressed state. Like I just never really had motivation. I Yeah, I just was a bit of a mess, and it was 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. in the lecture. My head was on the desk, and I remember him saying this really simple thing. He said, and the lecture was around psychology and the psychology of characters, and he said, like, unless you work on the things that are really holding you back, like traumas or shadows or the things that you repress, unless you bring it into the light and make that your mission to resolve, you'll never reach your true potential, and you'll never be the person that you're destined to be. And my head shut up, and I realized, wow, I have so much untapped trauma that I need to work on, that I just need to go deep on. And I didn't know what that would look like, but I knew I had to start. And it's been a long journey. I was going to say it's been, and it continues to be a journey. That's the thing. It's never ending. I recently realized that I had a bit of a, maybe you call it, some people call it spiritual ego, where I was like, I've done all my healing. I'm good now. Now I'm here to heal others, but it never ends, ever. And it gets easier, that's for sure. We learn tools to deal with things and how to be better versions of ourselves, and how to react to things, and have better networks as well, the people around us. But the work never ends. But it's important to start. There's that quote of, the best time to build an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So I would say, don't put off that growth, the personal development journey. There's so many worthwhile books out there to help you as well, to support you on that journey. I think some of the biggest books for me that I read, The Way of the Superior Man is a really big one.
Mm.
Uh, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Um, this is a really good one for anyone dating. It's called Models: How to Attract Women Through Honesty. That's by Mark Manson. And that one was a game changer. Anyone who's a single guy out there, you have to read that book.
Interesting.
What else is there? Yeah, those are probably some of my main ones. I've definitely got a lot of other books that I can recommend. Uh, but yeah, I would say, without a doubt, working on yourself is the key component to becoming the healthy masculine that you're destined to be. And then a lot of the other things fall into place naturally because you start loving yourself. And when you love yourself, you want to be healthy. You want to have good connections with people. You want to be reading and growing and learning and traveling and eating like nice foods. I think I already mentioned that, but it just kind of falls into place.
Yeah, I mean, I love what's coming up for me is I just keep thinking of the story about the two different like experiences with women that you had early in life. And the thing is, early in life, we have a completely different emotional maturity level.
Hmm.
So when we become adults, we almost invalidate the impact of those experiences because we have a higher emotional maturity level. And so we think, oh, that was nothing. That wasn't a big deal. But
Mm,
the truth is, those early life experiences, you were in a totally different level of emotional maturity. And so it had a different impact on you than how you're, you know, reprocessing the memory later in life. And just wondering, when you went through those two experiences, did anybody know about them?
mm.
Like, or did you just get rejected and no one else knew?
That's a really good point, in terms of like the emotional maturity of that age. And it definitely was really like, I remember at the time it was so difficult, like putting myself out there, and like I was terrified. And then the first girl, Rachel, I think I handed her a note or something, and it was like, "Will you go out with me?" And I remember just shaking and so afraid but excited, because I was like, I thought the answer would be yes. And I don't remember because it was a long time ago, but I don't think anyone knew about that one. I believe the second one, a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, knew about it, and he was supportive. Like, he's a good friend. So yeah, but I don't think many other people knew. And it's funny. So years later, my first girlfriend, I knew her for about 8 months, and I liked her that whole time. And we were in the same friendship circle. We used to go out to bars and events and gigs and listen to music and chill at the house together with friends. And the whole time I liked her. And I was terrified of asking her out because I thought I would get the same treatment, which is like, why would I go out with you? I'm not interested. And I was so used to falling into the friend zone. And I just thought that that's where I belonged. And I thought, even though she was giving me all the signals of like what someone would give when they're interested. And in hindsight, after we started dating, I was like, of course she liked me. But in that moment, I was like, no, she's just a friend. She like, because Rachel and Gabby, they were also friends. And I had thought, okay, they're giving me the signals where singles signals, and they're interested. But then they weren't. And then later on, when I had the same feeling with my first girlfriend, I was like, nah, it's just friend signals. But then when I finally asked her out after 8 months, actually, I kissed her on the dance floor, and I couldn't believe it. It blew my mind. I was like, what? She kissed me back? And then that night we were on the phone from like 1 a.m. to like 6 a.m. or something crazy, like on the phone for hours, just talking about like the last 8 months. I can't believe it. I liked you the whole time, and we're both like sharing all this like love and the story that like, and like, why didn't she ask me out? I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
she had a story as well. I mean, she definitely had a story, but yeah, I guess it took me to have that courage to make that move, and yeah.
I think a lot of women do have the story of like if you're, and I mean this is something that I've been taught, like consciously taught of like if he's interested in you, you will know. Like he will not make you question, meaning like he will be like, hey, I'm interested in you. But
Mm,
then it's like so true like you're saying like there's a bridge that needs to be created between these like masculine and feminine expectations, of like how
mm,
we're both showing up because it doesn't like, women shouldn't be waiting around for a man to take initiative in order for her to feel worthy or to feel like, oh, he might. But then at the same time, you know, there's so many factors to consider. But I love the work that you're doing because for you, it's all about, you know what, let's work on how I can show up in my integrity and my truth, my authenticity, and be a conscious man showing up in a way that resonates with me. um but it also, like, the last thing that you were making me think of, and the reason I asked you about those early experiences was because a lot of times, and I've mentioned this a lot recently, in our traumas, um a lot of the traumas we experience, there's a lack of witnessing. Like there's no one that's witnessing you in your distress. And as a young boy, being rejected, like in one of the most built up, emotionally, like you built up all this courage and then to get rejected and then have no one to help you process that
mm,
rejection, like something you're experiencing for the first time. So you're just in it by yourself,
mm,
left to your own devices. You're only going to create stories. Like that's what we do. We create stories to try to make sense. And we're like, well, the only thing that would make sense is I'm just not worthy, I'm not lovable, or I'm not good enough, or I'm only a good friend to women, or whatever it may be. And so, like, as you were describing, like, how to start your journey, it really just sounded like
mm,
re-witnessing all of those experiences that created these storylines that you've been perpetuating throughout your experience and how you move through life. So,
mm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. From memory, I don't recall having much support, and also because my dad wasn't around. I was 6 back then. My stepdad wasn't in the picture yet, so I didn't have a male role model to turn to about that kind of thing.
yeah.
I was left to work it out on my own, uh, and I guess some of the work now that I'm trying to do with men too is to help empower them to state their desires early. Obviously, not to like break the romantic courting process too much, where it's like, "Hey, I love you," or like, "I'm into you." Still there's got to be still a little bit of romance to it. But instead of waiting 8 months or like feeling the signs and not acting on it, or if you're feeling like, "Hey, I really like this woman, like I feel a connection growing, I'd like to date her or at least explore that," to honor that desire and actually lean into it and state that. Because by not doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're also being dishonest to her, because she A may be interested in you, but B maybe she's not. And then if you're only friends with her because you think there's a chance that you'll maybe date, then that's really dishonest. And a lot of friendships end in horrible ways like that, because if she's single and then all of a sudden she gets a boyfriend and she's like, "Hey, you should meet my friend who's this guy who's really sweet, is the nice guy," and then you and the new boyfriend are not going to get along because you are jealous and you're resentful that she chose him over you. So
Wow,
stating it
that's yeah.
early is so important. Like, it doesn't have to be right away, but if you have that desire and the connection is building, just say, like, as simple as, "I'm attracted to you. Like, would you like to go out as a drink or for a drink or for dinner or to a movie or do something as more than friends because I'd like to explore something with you, just so that that's out in the open and that you're not, yeah, left wondering and leaving her wondering as well.
I love that because that also like ties back into my point that like women by nature, like at least I think my belief, being conscious and having healed some of my own wounds, like for me, I'm like, I want to feel that intention from the opposite party. Like, I don't want to be left questioning or trying to draw my own conclusions of what their intentions are. Like, I want to know what are his intentions with me? Like, how does he feel about me? Even if it's just a, hey, I'm really curious to get to know you, or hey, I really have loved talking to you and I'm really excited to talk to you again. Like, being super clear and direct, I think is being conscious because you're acting on that emotional maturity level of you know what you want and you know what your intentions are and you have the confidence to stand in them. And so I really appreciate that that's something that you're doing with men. And just for timing's sake, I want you to have the opportunity to just like shout out any ways that any of my listeners can get in touch with you or to um, get access to your programs or how to follow your message. So I'll leave it up to you now to just kind of shout yourself out.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And ways that your listeners can find me is if there are any men who are interested in working with me, then I have a free 30-minute breakthrough confidence dating call that you can find on my page. It's philk360.com. So it's Phil with one L, and you've got my socials on there. You've got my number as well. You can call me directly or send me a text. But also, if you go down to schedule, it's on that page, and then schedule in the 30-minute breakthrough call, and we can have a discussion and work out where you are right now in your life, where you want to be in say 6 months or a year's time, and what you want to grow in terms of confidence and dealing with fear of rejection, and some of the ways that we can get there as well. I also have a few events coming up. There's one on the 19th of November. It's a free masterclass. It goes for an hour. It's going to be talking about a lot of these topics for single men. Then I also run a event on Sundays called the Circle of Kings, which is more of a men's group where men can connect and talk about issues. This is for all men, so not just single men, to talk about any kind of issue that's going on in your life, challenges, and get support from other kings who are in the group. And it's a lovely event that it's free. It's on Zoom, so you can find that all under the philk360.com page. And yeah, I'm also on Instagram as well, so connect with me there. I put up a lot of content around how to be the best version of yourself and dating and all the things that we discussed today. So thanks for that.
Wow, I love that. And I'm going to also add all that info into the show notes. So I'm going to just say thank you again for coming on. And I'm going to just close out the recording first before I say goodbye to you. So we're going to go ahead and thank you, all the listeners.